Ahoy! Joe Buddy Hambone here, and I'm back again with a brand new coupon code from our friends over at Noble Night Games. This time we got a long one for you. It's Ring of Warmth, and it's good from now all the way through February the 28th, and it will get you 10% off orders of $10 or more at Noble Night Games. That's right, the code's going to last a long time, and it's a long code as well. It's Ring of Warmth to get you 10% off orders of $10 or more at Noble Night Games running through February the 28th. It's a perfect time to get more games after the holiday season, and if you haven't yet, why not check out Noble Knight's trade-in program? I just did it myself. It was super easy, and now I have room on my shelves to put more games. And when I buy those games, I want to buy them from Noble Knight Games. I'm going to use the code Ring of Warmth, and it's running now through February 28th from our friends over at Noble Knight Games.
This is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me, as always, is the founder and publisher of Unwinnable. He said, "Hey, Hambone, today I want to talk about Dungeon Crawl Classics." And I'm like, "Stu, isn't that like every book pre-1990?
Not everyone.
I know. It's a broad palette there, I know.
There's some stinkers. There's a lot of stinkers.
For sure. But today we're not going to talk about a stinker. We're going to talk about the actual core book for Dungeon Crawl Classics.
We are. And it's sort of ironic that you say that, because I kind of had like a journey with Dungeon Crawl Classics. I really didn't like Dungeon Crawl Classics the first time I checked it out. Basically, I did two things. When I started getting into role-playing games, I discovered like the indie story game scene and the OSR scene at the same time. And I bought like big piles of books. So Dungeon Crawl Classics was one of the ones that was in the OSR pile. Gorgeous book. There's no denying the fact that like if you like this sort of black and white, old school D&D art aesthetic, you will love the book, Those Merits alone. It's just filled with classic artists from back in the day and new artists who are sort of like working in the same tradition. Peter Mullen, we talked a little bit about this in the Dungeon Alphabet book episode. Peter Mullen, Stefan Pogue, like there's just all Doug Kovacs, like there's so many cool artists working and it really gets to the vibe of the old school dungeon crawling experience. But at that moment in time, I just didn't get it. It seemed like too chaotic of a book. It seemed too into randomness, not enough like player choice. And as much as I loved all of the art, it's so big and it so dominates the page that every time I opened the book, I felt like it was shouting at me, which is a feeling that I get from a lot of Games Workshop stuff, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Like I always get like, everybody's always like the miniatures for, what's that game you like? Talisman?
I do love Talisman, yes.
The third edition of Talisman, like every miniature is just screaming. It's like, arm raised. And it's just like, I opened that box and it's just like, everybody's yelling. Why is everybody yelling? Can't we just have a conversation?
I mean, it is a fantasy game where you're trying to kill each other and kill other things. So, I mean, I'm here for all the arm raised, like, yeah, let's go.
Yeah. And I'm like a much more quieter person by nature, I guess.
I mean, have you met me?
No, I know.
I mean, come on.
But so Dungeon Crawl Classics is sort of like when I first encountered it, it's just built around experiences that aren't what I generally look for in a game circa 5 years ago. But then like over the course of the last several years, DCC is constantly being praised. I have a lot of friends who play it on the regular, just attest to its quality, to the point where I was just like, okay, I got to revisit this thing. And when I did, I realized that I was completely wrong. Dungeon Crawl Classics is a fantastic game. It's so amazing to me to like have been so sure of a thing and to have it change on you. It's like an object lesson. A lot of people, they make the decision of their opinion once and then that's it forever. And there's very little value in that to me. I think that you constantly have to be reevaluating or else you're going to miss things like Dungeon Crawl Classics. I would have missed out on this fantastic game.
And on that day, his heart grew 3 sizes and his wallet opened twice. And his poor FedEx delivery man had another crick in his back as he brought every received title for Dungeon Crawl Classics to the House of Horvath.
I have purchased several things from Goodman Games directly. The most recent one came in a box whose size was frankly obscene. I went from being like skeptical at best to being like, okay, I will buy all of your books.
Yeah. I remember that day. I remember that day in the Discord. You're like, well, hey, look at this. And then suddenly, like, we have a mail chat in our Discord. We always encourage people to show off the cool stuff that they get because we are excited that you're excited. And sometimes the Stu will get a package or 2 or 4, and it'd be picture. And that day it was like, Goodman.
Yeah. It's good stuff. They do good stuff. Goodman and Dungeon Crawl Classics kind of gets its start out of the D20 system for 3rd edition. The core of the DCC system, you don't see it, you don't notice it, but it's D&D 3. Like, what? Like, how do you build an old school game out of 3? But you do it by stripping out basically everything that makes 3 until you just have the bones. Initially, Dungeon Crawl Classics was a line of modules. It wasn't even a game, not a standalone game. So the idea was to really get at that old school vibe, which they did. They used the old, D&D trade dress. All those old D20 DCC modules feel like 1st edition dungeon crawls. They're zany, they're weird, a lot of like the moves into science fantasy, totally different energy from everything else that's going on in D20. And this is in the 2000s. Because they nail that retro aesthetic so well, it sort of starts to get people thinking. And, it leads Castles and Crusades to kind of try and strip out the modern stuff from D&D 3 and kind of hammer that system until it reflects the old school methods of play. And from that springs the whole OSR movement. Dungeon Crawl Classics kind of was at the lead of that, but like aesthetically, not mechanically, which is like an interesting place because I think that so much of the OSR is actually aesthetics first.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that drew most people I knew who were into D&D to it, because not to say that 3rd edition 3.5 is a bad system. However, around that time, it did rub a lot of players that I knew the wrong way. And it wasn't really the D&D that they were looking for and the experience that they were looking for, especially had they come up playing 1st and 2nd edition like most of them did. So these were the kind of books that would like say, wait a second, they're still making them. And there's something cool going on over here outside of what the normal hobby was pivoting towards at that time.
Yeah. And it all builds to, the discrete system that is DCC now, which is a gigantic book, but it is at its core a D20 kind of system. Like if you scratch at it hard enough, you can see it under there, under the old school candy coating. But it differentiates itself in a couple of key ways. One, and this is the thing that kind of rankled me initially, I still don't love the idea of funnels, but like I get the idea behind them better now than I used to. I like bespoke characters where I like noodle around and make my character exactly the way I want him, and then he dies, and then I'm sad, and then I, rinse and repeat. The funnel kind of like just blows that whole thing up, and it's just like you make your character, you roll randomly, you take what you get, and you don't just roll one character, you roll several characters, and then you take them all, they're all 0 level normal people, and you put them in like a meat grinder of a dungeon, and the one that survives is the one that you play going forward.
Yeah, I mean, having played D&D for as long as I have, that sounds like a blast. I mean, fun, it's in the name.
It's true. And it's just not, I'm so hung up on like narrative and stuff. So like, I just want to make cool characters. There's something to be said for the randomness and the surprise that not planning kind of gives you as the player. Funnels do tend to be kind of uproarious little slices of chaos. My friend Zach is insisting that on running me through a funnel soon. So after I do that, we'll talk more about funnels. But there's all kinds of funnels now. Zach actually wrote a like a teen adventure one. So like you could apply it in all sorts of different ways. That's sort of the initial foundation of the DCC experience, is this leaning on randomness. It makes the whole rest of the game a little bit lower powered because it eliminates the ability of players to really min-max their characters because it's all random. You have no control over it. It emphasizes luck over kind of planning, and it's deadly. And it sort of encourages through that deadliness a kind of rambunctious devil may care attitude. Like there is, I think, a disposability to the characters that is ludicrous and pleasant. They once you get through, the meat grinder, you're covered in blood and gore and horrified, traumatized by your experiences. So of course you're just going to kind of like pay that experience forward in all of your adventuring after that point. DCC is sort of like, I feel like the aim is to kind of burn your character out as dramatic a fashion as possible. So we're not looking at like long-term campaign play, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's like D&D deprogramming, which I think is a good thing. I think it's actually a very good thing because, the more and more that I play D&D, and again, not a slight on D&D, however, there is a very specific tendency that players have if they've been playing for a while that like, when you are first starting out, I'm going to take on this Minotaur at level 1 with this dorky sword that I have and get splattered into jelly.
Yeah.
Now you're level 15, level 20, you're thinking twice about kicking down a door. And that's the kind of thing where like you kind of get it ingratiated into your psyche when you're playing D&D, like after so long that like you care so much about this character that you've crafted that you're kind of like, well, now that I'm like actually super powerful, I'm more scared of dying. And that's a weird thing. Like, I'm running Bloodstone Mines right now for my Wednesday night group. They're about to go fight Orcus. They're level 20 and they're kind of like, I don't know, this one's going to be a tough one. And for all intents and purposes, I agree. But at the same time, I'm like, man, kind of running there like wild card bitches. Cause like, what are you going to do? Like you're level 20. Where do you go from here?
Yeah.
The funnel, the DCC stuff. I played Zach's game Blackout. It was awesome. I highly recommend everyone pick it up. The spirit of the adventurer is like alive and well with that because you're like, well, you know what? Fuck it. I got another character. I'm going to kick in this door. Like I've got a harebrained scheme. I'm going to run it. Or you're like, oh man, I want to try this. And this is so crazy. It just might work or it probably won't. And then you try it. And then like, if your character lives long enough, cool. If not, you got another character to play. And I think that's the spirit that's missing from a lot of RPGs is that you're supposed to be fearless. Because it's not actually you, it's a person on a piece of paper that you wrote up with a pencil. So
yeah, and DCC definitely, it encourages that kind of, I don't want to say fearless, because I think there is a lot of fear in DCC, but it's definitely a disregarding of that fear. Like, the fear is there, but you don't care and you do it anyway. How the mages work speaks to that. I feel like maging, it's certainly the reason why the DCC core book is so thick. It's because every spell has a chart associated with it.
I love it.
Yeah. So it took me a long time to understand why this was, because it made me feel like, oh God, this is going to be so tedious. Every time you cast a spell, you got to roll for your success or failure. You got to roll to see if the spell works. And again, it's taking you out of the weird like D&D tactical mindset where like you agonize over all of your decisions and like you cast the spell because it's the spell that you thought you would need. It's going to work exactly this way in this situation and it's going to cover this many hexes or whatever. And like you get so into the minutia of it. The fact of the matter is that arcane energy is arcane energy. It's like an unknowable thing. We can't quantify that because it doesn't exist in the real world, so you can't simulate it. So like the idea of like being able to tactically use this stuff is kind of silly. And these endless charts in Dungeon Crawl Classics are bonkers. So you can cast a spell and there's a pretty wide band of results in which the spell just works the way you expect it to. But then you can overcharge the spell and the spell will work even better. It'll work really good. And then there's a whole bunch of ways that they can misfire, which is great. I mean, like it's just an amazing thing to have a character be like, okay, I'm going to go all out. This is the last ditch. I'm going to cast this spell. I'm going to try my best to save the day. Otherwise, we're screwed. And then winds up nuking the planet is just like a beautiful thing to me. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
I love it, man.
Like, to encourage your players to go all out like that and knowing that there's a pretty good chance that it's going to blow up in your face. And to get the players on board with that, it really is quite an accomplishment. Cheese, who's played DCC quite a bit, has regaled us with stories sometimes in the Discord. And every time he tells me, it just sounds like the most ridiculous kind of fun. Like, and everybody dies at the end, and that's okay.
Hey, man, everyone likes to have a wizard who casts Fireball until it backfires. Like, I think that's great. There should always be a cost to magic. And it's cool when you have a dude who is like, I do all these like nuclear options. And that's what I do. Like, I show up, and if I get off this bench, everybody's going to die on the other side of the wall. But like that chaos, that uncertainty, it's like, well, he's coming off the bench. Is it our time too? I don't know. We're going to see how this roll goes. Like, that's wild. That's fun, man. That's exciting.
So yeah, just looking at the fireball, caster launches a fireball that jumps to different targets. This is the 22 and 23 result. Jumps to different targets 1d4 plus 1 times. The first target must be within 50 feet, takes 5d6 damage in an explosion radius of 20 feet. The fireball then skips to a second target that must be, blah, blah, blah. And so that's great. Like, oh, wow, cool. I could just bounce this thing to person, and it just keeps blowing up. Like, how could you not want to play this game?
Yeah, unless your guy's the guy next to the guy who's next to the guy and you roll real good. Oh, man. In my brain, like, I see this like a baseball dugout, and, coach is like, all right, he's out. You're in, Martinez. Get him.
Yeah, well, that was one of the good ones. A misfire, roll 1d5. 1, a small fireball explodes on the caster, causing 1d6 damage to him. 2, a large fireball explodes centered on the caster, causing 3d6 damage to him and all creatures within 20 feet. 3, caster spontaneously combusts, taking 2d6 damage and causing all flammable objects on him, including clothes and scrolls, to instantaneously crumble to ash. 4, caster summons the wrong element, generating a spray of ice that showers everything within 20 feet of him, causing no damage, but potentially dousing any existing flames. 5, caster's skin is badly sunburned across his entire body, and physical motion causes sharp pain.
Yeah, I mean, like,
so good.
You pay the cost to be the boss, man. You want to be the nuclear option. Got to be ready for the fallout.
So yeah, there's other stuff. Like, as a spellcaster, you could burn off attributes points to ensure that you get a better die roll on these tables. There's corruption. There's the weird luck mechanic. And then, of course, there's the funky dice. To properly play DCC, you need to get one of their sets of dice, which is a clever way to make money. But this is actually cool because we love dice. They have dice for basically every possible size: D3, D4, D5, D6, D7, D8, D10, D12, D14, D16, D20, D24, and D30. They're cool. I love my DCC dice because they're so doofy. And what you do is you kind of lay them out in front of you. And usually you're going to be rolling, your D20 to roll to attack because it's D20 system. And there are traditional D&D style modifiers and penalties that come into play. But there's also this other layer of the dice chain, which is like something really good could happen. You could move up a die. You go to D24. Something really, really good could happen, and you could get to roll the D30, and thus increasing your chances to roll really good and have good things happen. And bad things move you down the dice chain. There's some things like you saw the fireball fumble chart is a D5. You get to roll a 5-sided die. How often do you get to roll a 5-sided die?
Yeah, I mean, I remember there was a thing that came up and it was a D2. Who the hell makes a D2? And I went on this like, that's such a silly thing, a D2. And a buddy of mine was like, hey, I'm going to get a quarter in your pocket. I was like, yeah. And I was like, oh, yeah, I'll do it. That's a D2.
And there you go. But yeah, so there's a lot to love here. We haven't even talked about patrons for mages. You know how warlocks have patrons in
right.
5e? Yeah, like everything there's a million patrons to choose from in DCC, and they have different effects. Like I said, you can corrupt over time using magic. It's a great varied game that is sort of fine-tuned for creating random chaos at your game. It feels like a wonderful disaster kind of waiting to happen. A lot of people think that it has a very heavy metal attitude. I mean, yeah, it does. But I think that a lot of that comes out of the art more than the content. Like Doug Kovac's art is metal as hell. But like, is the system itself metal? I'm not sure. Michael Curtis, who did the Chained Coffin campaign setting, specifically tried to dial back the zany over-the-topness of DCC for that setting, because he was sort of just like, I'm not really that into metal, and I don't think that DCC is a metal system, like, metal in quotes. And I think that he's kind of right. I think that Chained Coffin has more of like a country hillbilly vibe that is closely mirrors the Manly Wade Wellman stories, and like it does get to something different. There is latitude there. I think that the Lankmar system for DCC is absolutely fantastic, and that actually has options for getting rid of the funnel altogether and making bespoke characters that are a little bit more powerful, a little bit more suiting of the heroicness of the setting. And you can see through those two and just, vanilla DCC that there is sort of like a play there in terms of what kind of experiences you can have around the table. I think that the core experience is really bombastic, but you can kind of drag that back and fine tune it for different experiences, which is kind of a testament to the versatility of the system that's hiding underneath all of this like shouting.
Yeah, and I think that's really the thing. As I was walking around Gen Con, and any other convention, when you see it, like the first thing you see at those covers, and you have a very certain idea of what you think it is. But the reality is that DCC is a fantastic system because it really does let you go whatever speed you want to go. Like there's no, well, it's all or nothing, my way or the highway. It's like, no, if you want the more bespoke experience, you could do this. If you want to do the funnel, you could do this. If you want to like have the metal, you got this. You want that hillbilly twang, we got this for you as well. But it's all based off the same system, which I think that a lot of other systems don't really lend themselves to, because it's, most rule sets are a very specific way for a very specific reason. Whereas this is like, hey, however you want to drive the car is up to you.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to be swerving on the other side of the street. You can follow the traffic laws in DCC. That's a really good metaphor. I like that.
Thank you. I mean, I drive like a grandmother in real life in general, so I don't even know like what that experience would be for me. But what kind of game that would translate to? There would probably be stones. I don't know, but I think it's cool. I think it's exciting because as this show goes into like its fourth year, we're doing year 4 now. We're going into year 4.
That's crazy.
We get to find out about more and more games that we've maybe experienced, but now we're kind of looping back around to, or just new things in general. And it's cool to essentially, it's been around long enough that it's a classic. Like it's not just, a fun tie into the name. Like it's been around long enough that like legally it could be considered a classic game, but I think it's cool. I think it's good to see a game like this really coming to the forefront of the hobby. And I would say over the last maybe couple of years, as far as I can see, that people are putting a lot of energy behind it. People are really getting behind DCC as a product, and it's becoming more prominent, which I think is a very cool sign for not only the health of the hobby and the idea of people, coming in for D&D and then going home with somebody else. It's pretty neat. I'm excited for the future of DCC.
Yeah, I think that DCC is a good alternative. I think that it really provides an experience that contrasts with what you get from 5e. And I do think that, like you said, the subsystems are sort of a little bit more rigid and a little bit more difficult to kind of cater to your whims. And I think that 5e is one of those systems. I think that the more you play it, the more it just becomes familiar and it doesn't really change. And that's the exact opposite of DCC. I think that every time you sit down to this game, it's going to be a completely different experience just because it fosters such chaos.
Yeah. And I mean, they also do a really good job of having other people write stuff like Zach,
Yeah.
I never would have expected Blackout to come out of what I consider a major company. Like I consider Goodman, I consider DCC like a major company in the RPG hobby. And to have a company like that, bringing out people to be like, oh, here, put the logo on stuff, use these rules, it's fine. We're getting such strong content from a lot of different players now, which I think is really great. And I think that is another huge plus to expanding the borders of the hobby, as it were. So I'm excited, man. I'm really happy. I'm really happy about DCC Classics. I'm excited for Goodman. I'm excited for people having more wacky fun at the table, because that's my kind of fun. It's party.
Hell yeah.
So with that said, Stu, do you have any final thoughts on Dungeon Crawl Classics?
I think that you shouldn't be like me. You shouldn't stick your nose up at DCC. You should give it a try, because I did that and I was wrong. So I've learned from my mistakes and just kind of maybe find a funnel to play. I'm going to do that. And after I do, I'm really excited to see what that really feels like as a play experience. I approach most of these things sort of through a critical lens as I'm reading them, and I will report back because it's always so much more exciting once you've played it.
Absolutely. So this is another amazing episode of the Vintage RPG Podcast. Stu, where can the people find you?
They can find me on Instagram at Vintage RPG. I already posted about DCC a while back. I might have some stuff in 2022. I don't really remember. I wrote all that stuff so long ago because I'm a lunatic.
I mean, you're like halfway through 2023 at this point. So who's to say what you wrote when? I mean, I can barely keep track of how many episodes we've done.
Yeah.
It's like 100, 40 something, 50 or whatever. I don't even know anymore.
I think this is 151.
So there you go. And you can find me on the Twitter and on Instagram at John McGuire RPG. I'm posting more. I've got things to promote. If you want to check out my adventure, 321 Action presents Rocket to Russia. You can get it over at Exalted Funeral. You were going there to spend your money anyway, so you might as well pick up my book. We have a patreon.com/vintagerpg. You have behind the scenes looks at Stu's book, still tentatively titled Experience Points. A behind the scenes look at my game 321 Action, as well as early release episodes. Some more fun things going on behind the scenes right now in a killer Discord community that we'd love for you to be a part of. Patreon.com/vintagerpg. And if you like the show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe, because your reviews really do help other listeners to find us. So for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dego West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.